Now.
On 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
Let's roll. It's 6:06 now, O'Connor and Company, this Thursday morning. Thanks for tuning in. We just covered quite a bit of yesterday's hearing over the border crisis, and we'll continue in that vein as the morning goes on. Coming up in just 30 minutes, Mark Krikorian, Center for Immigration Studies. 7:05, James Rosen of Newsmax on the mini summit there in San Francisco. 7:35, Vincent Vargas, who I believe was the John Travolta character in Pulp Fiction, right? Wasn't that Vincent Vargas? I think so. I'm going to go with that. He's also a former Border Patrol agent. 8:05, Miles Yu on Xi Jinping taking over communist San Francisco. And then at 8:35, Byron York is going to be joining us. My name's Larry O'Connor, and yesterday in D.C., out in front of the Democratic National Committee headquarters on Capitol Hill, like 2 doors down from a major Capitol office building for the House of Representatives, nothing short of a riot broke out. It began, as such things always do, with a fiery but mostly peaceful protest. Here's cut 10 here with the pro-Hamas crowd demanding a ceasefire now.
Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now! Ceasefire
Now, of course, in any just world, these protesters would be chanting that outside the offices of Hamas, because the ceasefire is completely in the control of the Hamas terrorists. All they have to do is release the hostages they continue to hold, including 9 Americans, by the way, and wave that white flag. You know, it's kind of an ancient tradition here. When you're engaged in a war or a battle of sorts and you want the shooting to stop and you want to protect your own life and the life of your citizens that you have put in harm's way by engaging in a armed conflict, then the white flag has been a symbol. Going back to medieval times, pre-medieval times, I'm thinking going back into like ancient biblical times. We're talking King David era. You want the ceasefire, you wave the white flag. Super easy, man. No more need for these summits and meetings and discussions and press conferences. White flag, ceasefire. Boom. Done. But no, the protesters, shockingly, were not outside the Hamas headquarters. They were outside the Democratic National Committee's headquarters. Boy, did they bake quite a cake there, the Democrats. Here's cut 11, the same protesters outside the DNC demanding that Gaza be allowed to live.
Let Gaza live! 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 Let Gaza live!
That's absolutely lovely. Absolutely, because, of course, the ceasefire that allowed Gaza to live was intact right up until October 7th, when the Gazans decided to slaughter over 1,000 innocent Israelis and take over 200 of them hostage after, of course, raping them, beheading them, and baking babies in ovens. And then the protest, well, you know how these things happen, spirals out of control a little bit. And the next thing you know, you're pounding down the doors of the DNC headquarters and, by the way, blocking every single exit of that building. Listen to this.
Guys.
That would be the Capitol Police trying to intervene and pull these people away from the doors. No doubt some of these Capitol Police officers may have even been the ones testifying before Liz Cheney's January 6th committee about the worst day in American history. It was an absolute chaotic nightmare in front of the DNC with members of the House of Representatives, including Congressman Sherman, trapped inside the building. And I love there was this little dust-up amongst reporters last night. Dave Weigel of the Washington Post, who I don't get him sometimes. I've known him for years. He's that guy in the back of the room when the teacher or a student makes an assertion of sorts that is obvious and logical and just doesn't really require any kind of backup, something like, the people who are protesting on behalf of Hamas are in fact pro-terrorist. That a basic truth that doesn't really need to, be supported by any other facts other than just the obvious logical A equals B and B equals C, therefore A equals C, one of those things. And then Dave Weigel's the guy in the back of the room that says, actually, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. The actually guy. The actually guy? So last night, people were reporting that these protesters were trying to break into the DNC headquarters. And Dave Weigel started, because he was there, he took video. And he said, well, actually, they weren't trying to break in. Oh, well, let's look at the video here. There's like 30 of them, all crammed into the glass doorway of the DNC headquarters. The doors had been locked, and they're pounding on the doors. But I guess technically that's not 100% evidence, clear and cut, that they're trying to break in. No, they're not trying to break in. They're just trying to break the glass doors down. Once the doors got broken down, then I'm sure they would have just walked away. They weren't trying to break in. Come on. There were 5 people arrested. Excuse me, 6. Let me start this again. There were 6 police officers injured last night. Pepper spray was employed to try to get the rioters out of the way. Officers were punched themselves. They were pepper sprayed as well by the protesters. And let me give you the list of the arrests here, because it's extensive. Are you ready? Are you taking notes here? Because I want to make sure you know all of the various individuals. Because, not only do their names need to be put out there, but their pictures need to be put out there. Their lives need to be ruined and destroyed, because that's what we had to do after January 6th, right? It's the only thing that you can do when you're trying to protect our democracy that's at stake here. So this insurrectiony riot that trapped congressmen at the DNC headquarters with their building under siege, with hundreds trying to bust through the glass doors and break in as they were demanding justice for terrorists. Let me give you. Sit down now. Take a deep breath. Here are all the arrests. 1 unidentified person was arrested. 1 person. And strangely, it wasn't this person. Cut 13 here. This maniac who saw somebody with a camera and decided that she needed to speak her piece. Here, this is the tenor and tone of the very calm pro-peace activists who were merely peacefully demonstrating in front of the DNC headquarters last night here in Washington.
We're outside the DNC. We're outside the Democratic Party headquarters because this party claims to be on the side of life and peace and equality. And we're saying that we want them to live up to their values and oppose this horrific war and call for a ceasefire now. And we're being responded to by the police shoving anti-war activists down the stairs, shoving peaceful protesters back with their bikes. And because our party that 80% of us want a ceasefire, would rather beat up protesters.
1 person arrested. 1 person arrested for assault on an officer during what the Capitol Police describe as an illegal protest. So the protest was illegal, and it wasn't a protest. It was a riot, and it was an attempted break-in. It was an act of violence. If this is the Capitol Police specifically call this an illegal protest. If it's illegal, why wasn't every single person engaged in that illegal activity arrested? Please, anyone? Can you answer that? 1 person was arrested for assault of a police officer. No one else was arrested. And if you notice that this is being treated differently by the Capitol Police, treated differently by Democrats in Congress, treated differently by the Justice Department, and certainly treated differently by the media than they treated January 6th. I wonder why. We might explore that question in a moment. But first, it's 6:15.
WMAL.
Making sense of the news.
Live
From the Home Paramount Pest Control Studios.
Home Paramount, the leader in pest control since 1939.
Later this morning on the Chris Plant Show, New York's Democrat governor standing up a surveillance apparatus to monitor social media for thought crimes. 9 a.m. on WMAL.
Yeah, 1 person arrested. Every single house building was shut down. The Capitol was shut down. Every single office building surrounding the Capitol where congressional staff and Senate staff's work, and they were working well into the night last night because of the bill to continue funding the government. So every single office was shut down. Staffers were all locked in place. One person arrested. And the Metropolitan Police Department announced that they were assisting with what they're calling First Amendment activities. That was could we just take a quick listen again? This is cut 10. Can we? Or actually, no. I'm sorry. Cut 12. Let's do cut 12 here. This is the sound of a First Amendment activity.
Get back, guys.
That's the police getting crushed by the crowd as they try to break through the glass doors of the DNC headquarters. One police officer was pepper sprayed. I'm sorry, what? A police officer gets pepper sprayed during a First Amendment activity? Is that how we describe it? Hey, what happened to you at work today? You know, I was assaulted. Somebody squirted pepper spray in my face. Gotta love the First Amendment. Is it the government shall not infringe on the person's right to free speech or right to pepper spray? I always get that mixed up. Madison wrote that one, right? First Amendment activities the Metropolitan Police Department assisted in there. By the way, this is my absolute favorite part. There's a group called If Not Now. They announced and claimed credit for the protest. This is what terrorist groups do, right? I always love that. Back in the good old days before 9/11, you would have this terrorist act, and then within 24 hours, a group would claim responsibility. We did that. We did that. They don't do that much anymore because George W. Bush started sending missiles into their headquarters. Now terror groups, generally speaking, don't say, oh, yeah, we did that. That was us. Back in the good old days, that's what it would. Why would you want to claim credit for this? Well, because you're evil. That's why. So now we've got this group, If Not Now, claiming credit for last night's insurrection against the DNC. Are we going to be investigating this group? Are they a threat, perhaps? Do we want to know where their money's coming from, perhaps? It's curious. Because if Grandma walked through a door of the Capitol on January 6th with a police officer holding the door open for her, she got hunted down. The FBI stormed into her house at 6 a.m. with guns a-blazing, and she was held without a hearing for months on end. But last night, only one person was arrested. We know the name of the group responsible for the melee and the violence and the destruction and the vandalism. And Metropolitan Police Department refers to it as First Amendment activities. Correct me if I'm wrong. Didn't Merrick Garland just recently testify under oath saying that there are not two tiers of justice in this country, that everybody's treated equally under the law? Does this look equal to you? Does it? It's 6:21. A couple of other items here about these protests last night. The riot last night in front of the DNC. Protesters said that they were targeting this building in particular because they believed high-ranking Democrats were inside. So that's deliberate, that's malicious, that's premeditated. They were specifically trying to intimidate, frighten, and target high-ranking Democrats, thinking that would put pressure on Joe Biden. But as I'm sitting here complaining that no more than one arrest was made last night in these riots, I have to realize that's actually, we should be grateful that one person was arrested. Let's face it, in a city where carjacking is barely against the law, and if carjackers are caught and apprehended, they're released the very next day to continue their violent activities, I guess we should be grateful that just one person was arrested. We're in D.C. after all. It's the crime capital of the world. Meanwhile, Rashida Tlaib clearly was not one of the high-ranking Democrats these terrorist-loving rioters were targeting, because she's one of them. It's now been revealed that Rashida Tlaib is part of a private Facebook group. It's shut off from the public, but reporter Joe Schofstall at Fox News Digital gained access to the group. And this private Facebook group that Rashida Tlaib is a member of has spent the last several weeks after the October 7th terror attacks cheering on Hamas, celebrating Hamas, not equivocating, which is bad enough, not saying, well, you know, they were just pushing back against occupation, and, as bad as this was, you have to look at it in the full context. No. They're cheering them on. They're celebrating them. They're calling it a glorious day. And Rashida Tlaib counts herself among their group, the Palestinian American Congress, it's called, which, if we don't watch ourselves, will be the next Democrat majority Congress in the United States. The Palestinian American Congress. Coming up in a moment, Mark Krikorian, Center for Immigration Studies on the Border Crisis. It's 6:29. Oh, forgive me. I forgot that we're taking this right up to the news. Yes, Mark Krikorian is going to be joining us a moment from now. Talk about yesterday's hearing on Homeland Security and what they called a worldwide threats hearing. All of this sort of integrates with itself, frankly. Gone are the quaint days where we worry about the southern border and securing that border with regard to our jobs and our economy and the drain on state budgets to have to care for people who aren't supposed to be in this country illegally. No. And frankly, gone are the days where we even worry about MS-13 and Salvadoran gangs coming in and setting up their drug operations and their violence in our neighborhood. Sure, we worry about that now as well. But now add to that the worldwide terror threat and our government's inability to even know who's in this country and what harm they mean for us. That's what we're seeing playing out on our streets right now, and that's what Mark Krikorian will address coming up next.
WMAL-FM, Woodbridge, Washington, a Cumulus media station.
Making sense of the news.
News Talk 105.9.
News now.
On 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
It's 6:37 now on O'Connor and Company. Thanks for tuning in this Thursday morning. Thanks for letting us be a part of your morning routine. A lot to get to. Coming up at 7:05, James Rosen on the mini summit there in San Francisco between Biden and Xi. 7:35, Vincent Vargas, former Border Patrol agent. 8:05, Miles Yu, also on that China summit. And then at 8:35, Byron York of Washington Examiner. I'm Larry O'Connor, and joining us now is Mark Krikorian. He's, of course, the Executive Director for Center for Immigration Studies. And quite a day yesterday on Capitol Hill, Mark. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, glad to be here.
I mean, we moved the ball a little bit down the field yesterday with FBI Director Wray at least conceding the fact that this border crisis over the last 3 years has turned every state into a border state. He said that every single one of the FBI field offices, all 56 of them, are now engaged in potential terror threats due to illegal crossings, gotaways, people who have come through this porous border on our the southern border with Mexico, who happen to be on the terror watch list, or for that matter, we don't even know if they're on the terror watch list or not, but they still mean us harm. I mean, that is something, at least he's conceded that. I think he's the first person working in the Biden administration that concedes that every state is now affected in a negative way by this.
Yeah, of course. I mean, you're seeing more and more people, whether it's Democratic mayor of New York or the FBI director, admitting the obvious. The thing is, the guy in charge of immigration, who is Alejandro Mayorkas, the Homeland Security Secretary, he still won't admit that there's anything wrong. In fact, he was even asked, what would you define as a bad day?
Right.
As far as the number of people at the border, which Obama's DHS secretary has publicly said years ago, not relatively recently, 1,000 arrests of illegal aliens at the border would be a bad day. Well, I'm not sure. I don't think they've ever been less than 1,000 a day under this administration. Mayorkas literally won't say that, won't admit it. It's all the border's secure. It's all hunky dory. It's like that Baghdad Bob guy during the invasion of Iraq.
Yeah.
Who was telling reporters, there are no American tanks in Baghdad, as one was literally driving behind him. So, so I don't know what we call him. Ali. Anyway, there's got to be some
Baghdad Alejandro. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
You're right. He was also asked, if you could do anything differently over your 3 years, what would you do differently? And he said he couldn't come up with anything. He couldn't come up with anything. Yeah.
because I would admit that there was some flaw in the policy, and they just can't admit that.
Yeah, well, you use the word policy, and let's be clear. It's not like they're trying to secure the border and they're just, lacking resources or without a wall, they can't get it done, et cetera, et cetera. This is the policy, is it not? Their policy is to increase the flow and bring as many people in. Their only concern is that it doesn't look orderly when the TV cameras are turned on.
I mean, you're right. That's what they're worried about. But I don't think that their policy is to let in as many people. I think their policy is that any step that would interfere with people coming across the border is unacceptable. In other words, if nobody came, it's not like that would be a problem. The issue is stopping people who do want to come, because this administration, they do not believe that immigration law is legitimate, that stopping people who want to come here is morally unacceptable, is what they think. And so they cannot bring themselves morally to do the things that are necessary to stop people, illegal immigrants, from coming in the United States, and this is the result.
Our guest is Mark Krikorian, Center for Immigration Studies, and this, over the years as we've had these conversations, Mark, we discussed the economic impact, the strain on state budgets with regard to education and health services, the cultural issues with mass illegal immigration, the crime due to MS-13 and other gangs bringing their operations up into neighborhoods. But now, after the April 7th attacks, we're right back to where we were September 12th with regard to the very real national security threat. This is the whole reason why immigration and border control was put under the umbrella of Homeland Security. Before 9/11, wasn't it the Department of Treasury that handled this stuff?
No, it was Department of Justice. But
Justice,
excuse
me. Thank you.
We learned this lesson you're talking about in World War II. Because before 1940, immigration was in it was Department of Labor, I think, at that point. And so in 1940, they said, oh, boy, this is potentially a threat of people coming in. We have to move this to a law enforcement agency. So this is a lesson we learned 80 years ago, and this administration is forgetting it already.
Well, what about the Republicans who are running for office right now in terms of how they can best explain the urgency of this crisis and move it forward? Because I think we've gone beyond just, build that wall and get Mexico to pay for it, haven't we?
We should have. The discussion, all the candidates in the debate last week were all talking about how the border was important, which is fine. That's a start. But the question is, what is their broader immigration vision? And unfortunately, too much of the Republican Party is still living in, 2004, when George Bush said any worker who wants to come here who has somebody who can hire him should be let in. They just want it to be done in an orderly way at the border. I mean, this is Nikki Haley's take, is that there should be unlimited immigration determined by businesses. And it's just that, like the Biden administration, they want it to happen in a more orderly way so it doesn't look bad in the newspapers. So, look, we've made some advances in the discussion of immigration, but not enough, in my opinion. Too much of it is still mired in this idea of what I call legal good, illegal bad. Yeah. That if people only come through the ports of entry, well, then everything's fine. There's nothing to worry about.
Mark Krikorian, Executive Director for Center for Immigration Studies. I implore you, as always, to visit their incredibly rich and deep website to educate yourself. Everything that they have there is annotated and referenced with links so that you can really be informed on this issue on a factual level instead of merely an emotional level. Although if you're separating your emotions from our national security, you've got to rethink things anyway. Mark Krikorian, always great to have you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Larry.
We can't wait for your Christmas party, by the way. Oh, hey. We do love Springtime for Hitler, don't we, Mercedes Schlapp? That's our favorite musical, The Producers. And as we now have actual legit Nazis and anti-Semitic, Jew haters marching on Capitol Hill or for that matter, members of the Capitol Hill Democrat caucus like Rashida Tlaib, it's always good to point out who leans closest to Nazis in our American body politic. Don't you agree? I mean, that's always
no. Can I just say something? Did you see the big breakout in over at the DNC headquarters where like all these pro-Hamas protesters were there? Or was that at the 5 o'clock
Mercedes,
hour that I missed?
I just spent half an hour talking about it. I'm sure you were listening before you joined us. Yeah, there they are. That's what they sound like. All right, but as usual, as we literally see Rashida Tlaib using anti-Semitic, Nazi-like language to describe the state of Israel, instead, our concerns apparently need to be Donald Trump, because here's what he said over the weekend at a rally. Listen.
The communists, Marxists, in honor of our great veterans on Veterans Day, pledge to you that we will root out the communists, Marxists, fascists, and the radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country.
There you go. Did you hear it?
Did
you hear it? That was it. That was it. We're now told that Donald Trump is a Nazi and he's appealing to Nazis in America by using the term vermin. That's what we should be afraid of. That's what's Nazi-like.
I thought he's rooting these people out. I mean, he's rooting the communists out.
Oh, he is, but he called them vermin.
Last time I checked, Biden was hanging out in California with President Xi, and there was a bunch of Chinese flags in San Francisco. I mean, what is going on?
Yeah, listen, that you don't have to worry about. What is terrifying to the American body politic is the use of the word vermin. Now, listen, he's a New Yorker. New Yorkers know a little thing about vermin, okay? In fact, he's a building owner in New York. So vermin is like part of the everyday existence when you manage a building in New York. But I kid you not, the media is now taking this, and they're saying, see, he's just like Hitler, he's just like Mussolini. Listen, last night, here's Vivek Ramaswamy on CNN pushing back against this nonsense.
That language, they live like vermin. Do you believe that that is, as your Republican colleague Chris Christie has said, neo-Nazi rhetoric?
This is a classic mainstream media move. Pick some individual phrase of Donald Trump, focus on literally that word without actually interrogating the substance of what's at issue.
The word was chosen for a reason.
We are in the middle of a cultural war in this country.
The word was chosen for a reason.
It's actually describing a series of behaviors. You have Antifa and other related groups that have been burning down cities for the last 3 years in this country.
Would you describe them as vermin?
Wildly violating the rule of law. We have an invasion on our...
He's absolutely right, Mercedes. They pay no attention to the actual destruction and un-American activities that these people are engaged in. No. Just make sure you don't call them vermin, because if you use the word vermin, you're the problem. And meanwhile, Rashida Tlaib literally is saying from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, which calls for the extermination of the Jewish state. Donald Trump actually moved the American embassy to Jerusalem, but he's the Nazi.
Well, and on top of that, you see these Democrats that they constantly they call the MAGA people extremist. Think about it. They're the
fascist
ones using this type of language. They're the ones that use the word fascist. And, obviously this language that they've been talking about Donald Trump with Hitler, for example, they started preempting that language a while back ago. Just recently, you saw Hillary Clinton on The View using that word, basically saying that Donald Trump, is likened to Hitler. So they've tried everything. They're like, Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. Now they got to move to for him being Hitler. I mean, this is the propaganda of the left. It's what they do. They try to vilify Donald Trump. They've been trying to do this and his supporters forever, Larry. And so they're going to take one word, like you mentioned, take it out of context, and at the same time that he's saying he's going to take down the communist. I don't know. Just makes no sense to me.
Listen, I remember the good old days where if you used the OK sign, you were a white supremacist and Nazi. Or for that matter, the set design for the CPAC conference in Orlando was a Nazi symbol that, of course, nobody...
You always have to bring up the CPAC controversies. I mean, come on.
Well, of course, that's my favorite part.
You
of
just
CPAC.
love it.
Because they have to make things up. I'm just sorry that I've never.
That was actually kind of a hilarious year, especially because it was a Jewish designer.
Set designer. I know. Given all of the atrocious things that I have said on the stage at CPAC, why have I never been singled out? It would be doing wonders
you've been singled
for my
out.
career.
Oh, wait. You've been singled out by Jenna Ellis.
Oh, that's true. Jenna Ellis came out. Thank you for reminding me. It's 6:53.